Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Simon Ganapathy, president of AAUW Morgan Hill branch. Thank you to all of you, the members of the public, MHUSD administrator, from the Morgan Hill, MHUSD administration, teachers, students, AAUW members, including our very own MHUSD superintendent, Carmen Garcia. Thank you so much for being here. What I'd like to say first and foremost is, if I may please remind you to turn off your phone ringtones, just so that we aren't regaled with, musical chimes in the middle, and that'd be great. Thank you. So let's begin. And before we begin, of course, we would love to honor the first peoples of the land that we are on. So please do join me in listening to our land acknowledgement statement read by our branch DEI co-chair and Gavilan College trustee, Kathy Chavez-Napoli.
This is very important, so I hope that you will listen and appreciate what is said here. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the AAUW-MHUSD tribal band of Ohlone Costanoan Indians. We formally recognize and respect the AAUW-MHUSD as the traditional stewards of this land known as Popolopo. The AAUW-MHUSD continue to carry out their obligation given to them by Creator to care for their traditional lands, water, and forests with neighboring tribes.
Thank you, Kathy. So tonight's program is brought to you by AAUW Morgan Hill in collaboration with the Morgan Hill Unified School District, MHUSD for short, that I was talking about. So I'd like to take a moment first to introduce the organization of AAUW, or the American Association of University Women. So we were founded nationally in 1881. So yes, we are about 143 years old. AAUW is a non-partisan, non-profit organization and a leading voice for advancing gender equity through research, education, and advocacy. Our values include being inclusive, intersectional, intergenerational, and empowering. Just looking at our branch, you will definitely see all the various generations, and we get along very well together. Though we are not partisan, we are not values neutral, and we work hard to remove barriers and biases that stand in the way of gender equity. So this year alone, National AAUW gave over $6 million in scholarships and fellowships. Racial and social justice for all to achieve our vision of equity now is important to us. Now, our Morgan Hill branch was founded 100 years later, in 1989, but that still makes it almost 43 years old. Since its inception, we have contributed to the community in many ways, through and many of you are aware through various categories of scholarships, high school seniors and college students, community action grants to support our local nonprofit organizations, STEM summer camps, leadership training, and equity programs, all of which we accomplished by allocating 100% of our proceeds from our well-known annual Wildflower Run. It's a much-loved Morgan Hill tradition. And our 41st annual run this March was sold out again this year. So we believe that education is a great equalizer, allowing everyone to thrive. We engage with our community by organizing many monthly programs, and this is one way for us to connect together, including everything else that we do. We cover social, economic, and political issues pertaining to our mission. Our DEI team's Red Dress exhibit just last week was really well attended and received, and despite the rain, we were so grateful for everyone. If you were one of them, thank you for coming. It was powerful, thought-provoking, much needed. We really need to know more and do more. We work with the city and local partners. We host Earth Day as well as candidates forums during election years. Guess what? That's this year. So later in the fall that we will be hosting 3 candidates forums with our new president. Our incoming president is Christy Bossier right there. Say hello to her. At the helm, and we have a president-elect Harpreet Bittle right at the back up there. We have Sheila Dambudi and Karen George, both of them also forming part of our board. Thank you in advance for everything that you're going to do. Of course, you all already do a lot. So tonight, a collaboration with the Morgan Hill Unified School District is an important one. And here to introduce it and also to introduce all the speakers is our incredible and incredibly hardworking public policy chair, Susan Wright. So over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. It's nice to see a full house. And if I don't talk loud enough into this mic, say you can't hear me, and try again. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending and participating in our panel discussion about hot topic curricula in the Morgan Hill schools. My name is Susan Wright, and I'm Public Policy Chair for the Morgan Hill branch of the American Association of University Women. Within the framework of the AAUW mission, which Suman already outlined, AAUW's public policy priorities include equal access to quality public education for all students and social and racial justice for all members of society. Last fall, the state organization established the School Board Project to monitor public school boards and protect them from those who want to ban books, censor curricula, and initiate policies that harm LGBTQ+ students who are too often the targets of bullying and discrimination. To that end, we thought it would be helpful to this community if we were to bring together district administrators, teachers, and students to present some factual information about what's being taught in classrooms beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic. Hence this evening's panel. Thank you for your willingness to discuss what can be thorny topics. We do have some ground rules for tonight's discussion. If you don't already have a note card and a pencil on which to write a question, they will be distributed to you. And we will do our best to get through as many of those as time allows. We ask that everyone respect the dignity, not only of our panelists, but of each other. I have to say that when I began working on this event more than 2 months ago, I had no idea how reluctant teachers would be to participate. They fear personal attacks and harassment. To me, that is just shameful in a civilized society. So thank you, teachers, for being here. We intend not to need them, but we do have police presence in the parking lot. But I'm sure that we can all behave ourselves and just treat each other with dignity and respect. So after I introduce our panelists, our format tonight will be short statements from each of them about their role in public education. I'll ask some questions of them as we go along, and then we'll spend the last 30 minutes or so asking questions on your behalf. AAUW members will collect those questions from you before that Q&A section begins. So let's begin. Deanna, I'm starting at the far end. Deanna Jimenez is Assistant Superintendent of Education Services in the district. Next to her is Julie Aguirre Jacinto, Director of Elementary Education. She's responsible for supporting curriculum, instruction, and assessment at the district's 8 elementary TK to 8 schools. She also supports alignment between the elementary and secondary schools. Next to her is Jessie Swift, Director of Student Services and Enrollment. She supports school sites with a variety of things, including but not limited to school climate, culture and safety, discipline, attendance and truancy, social emotional supports, mental health and wellness, community-based organizations, oversight of the care team, which supports students and families experiencing homelessness and foster youth, community schools, enrollment, and the student information system and data reporting. Next to her, Avery Unterreiner doesn't have such a long thing. She teaches AP Literature, College Placement English, and Ethnic Studies at Sobrato High School. Next to her, Tammy Miller teaches science at Britton Middle School. She was born and raised in Morgan Hill and has been teaching at Britain for the last 8 years, covering 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science, as well as human reproduction. She brought for us the models of human organs over here. We'd like to look at what used to be handed around, I guess. Next to her, Sunny Scott has taught social science in the Morgan Hill School District for more than a decade. While she currently teaches AP US Government and Politics, Economics, and AP Psychology at Live Oak High School, she has taught world and US history for many years as well. Next to her, a couple of our students. Kaylin Nguyen is a junior at Sobrato High School and a co-leader of AAUW's Young Women Leaders program. Next to her, Ish Chandra is a sophomore at Sobrato and is also co-leader of the Young Women Leaders program. And last, we've already met Kathy. Kat Napoli is a trustee on the Gavilan College Board and sits on AAUW's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. She is president of Citizens Oversight for Measure G for the Morgan Hill Unified School District, a board member of the Morgan Hill Historical Society, and a former elementary and preschool teacher. So thank all of you for being here. We have a big line of you. So Deanna, we're going to pass the mic along as we go. So Deanna, would you begin, please, by sharing with us how curriculum is determined at the state and local levels, and try to do not an hour.
How long do you have? Yeah, that's how it feels like.
But it's kind of a big chunk, so
Yes.
take a little time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so thank you so much for inviting us. I'm really excited and happy to be here and have my colleagues here as well. A little bit about sort of like the broad picture of how we get curriculum to our schools. So we have two seminal documents that the California Department of Education must put together. First seminal document that we base our kind of core instruction when you think about art, math, English language arts, and science, right, are the standards. So the standards are put together by a group of experts, teachers, administrators, and industry partners as a collaboration that is put together and run by the California Department of Education. And they work on the standards for, I would say, most of the time, for about 18 months to 24 months, depending on the subject. And so they have a lot of collaborative meetings, they do a lot of check-ins, they have public meetings, and eventually those standards are finalized. And then they are sent to the State Board of Education for their approval. So that takes quite a bit of time. So the standards, if you want to think about them in a big umbrella, they're the what, right? What do we expect students to be able to know and do in a particular subject, right? Whether it's science or math or English language arts. The standards is one of the seminal documents, and those are TK through 12th grade in California. The second very seminal document that's specific to individual subjects is what we call the frameworks. So you can think of the frameworks as the why and how of how we deliver those standards. That framework also takes place basically in the same manner as we adopt the standards. There is a long and collaborative process at the California Department of Education. They solicit members from community organizations, industry partners, organizations, administrators, and teachers, and folks who practice teaching in the classroom, myself included, for example, to meet together and deliberate of the implementation of those core standards. So once standards are adopted, the next thing is adopting those frameworks. There are 9 frameworks in California. Each of those is structured. It takes about 18 to 24 months to structure, to put together, to solicit feedback from stakeholders all across California. That is part and parcel of the way both standards and the frameworks in California are adopted, that after we have a really good draft that's sent out to all parts of California so that the public can give us input, they're revised, and then once we have a good draft, they're sent to the State Board of Education, and those are adopted. Those two pieces, the what, which is the standards, what we're expecting the students to be able to know and do, along with the frameworks, which tell us and provide guidance on how to teach a particular standard, what materials to use, right, and what other things to include are very important when we think about curriculum and instruction. So those are the two very big seminal documents. The next question that you probably are asking yourself is, okay, so you've got these two sort of big umbrella documents. So how does that trickle down to my school district, right? How do we adopt curriculum from that? Well, it's another long process. So Susan, I'm gonna try to keep it short. So the way it works is the the State Board of Education appoints a committee that has a 5-year membership. It's called the Instructional Quality Control Committee. That committee, its sole purpose is to make sure that, one, we adopt frameworks in the way that they're established by the California Department of Education by statute or by the legislature. So that's one of the roles. Their second role is to make sure that once we have content standards, once we have frameworks, that they establish a process by which members of another committee get to look at publishers' material. So the Instructional Quality Commission solicits membership, again, just like the standards and just like the framework, from members from all over California, with practitioners, university, community-based organizations, practitioners, teachers, administrators, and they meet together and they look at materials that are put together by the publishers. So let's assume that we have brand new, as we do now, standards for mathematics and a framework for mathematics. The next step is figuring out what curriculum will districts be able to look at. So right now at the California Department of Education, the Instructional Quality Commission is putting together this great committee to look at all the materials that will be able to reflect the brand new standards and the brand new frameworks. That work with the Instructional Quality Commission takes about another 18 months. Because there's a lot of back and forth, right? There's negotiating of what should be in the materials in that curriculum. What are we looking for? Remember how we have those 2 seminal documents of what to teach, but why to teach it and how to teach it, right? So that all those things have to be reflected in those publishing materials. Eventually, after about 18 months of work, that committee, with a lot of evidence, then puts together a list that it presents to the State Board of Education. And it says, we have new content standards, we have new frameworks. These are the materials for TK8 that are best suited to address those needs. Once that publisher's list is adopted by the State Board of Education, it is then released to the public and districts like ourselves, where we take that list and then we start our own adoption process that very similarly mimics what the State Board of Education does, what the Instructional Quality Commission does, but in a smaller scale, right? So we also bring our teachers, our administrators, our folks who practice, and we look at those materials and we go through a very similar process to adopt materials for a course. So it's a very lengthy answer to, like, how do we go from the state adopting standards and frameworks to how do we then, it trickles all the way down, how do we get a publisher's list for adoption of materials?
So you have options then within this list that you may be able to tailor your choices of textbooks and that sort of thing to the needs of this particular school district. So what's being offered here in fill in the blank class may or may not be the same as what's offered in San Jose, in Gilroy, in Hollister, in Pasadena,
Right.
Or Los Angeles. So
That's-
you're looking very much at the demographics, at the needs of the community. But how do you define needs of the community?
Well, the publisher's list, you can't adopt parts and pieces. So for TK8, you must adopt the whole textbook. So if you see over there on that table, you see a book that's called Wonders, right? That's the curriculum we adopted a few years ago for English Language Arts and ELD. So if you adopt Wonders, you adopt the whole series of Wonders for TK through 8th grade. The way that you solicit input from the community is part of that adoption process. So we have the practitioners, our wonderful teachers, our administrators who participate in a long process of looking at all the publishers, right? Sifting through that material, piloting some of those items, and then soliciting feedback from the public when we're ready to present an adoption.
Okay, that sounds complicated. Time-consuming.
A little bit.
Just a little bit. Okay. So Jessie, we're to Julie next, is Director of Elementary Education. So maybe you could talk a little bit about all of what she said begins to, you're the next tier, I guess, right? So tell me a little bit about what happens in your job, in your office, in terms of making the big picture stuff start to happen in a classroom.
Yeah, so So as she mentioned, all of that guidance and information comes down to the district, and then we start the process of reviewing materials. So for elementary right now, we are in the process of looking at a phonics curriculum to supplement our adopted curriculum. The Wonders curriculum that she referenced that's over there, we adopted in 2017. And the teachers have learned more since then and have determined that we need some additional supplementary materials to help strengthen our phonics instruction. So the way that we've gone about that process is that we identified 5 potential phonics curriculums that may meet the needs of our students and teachers. And it came from the recommendation of Elementary Curriculum Council, and our Elementary Curriculum Council has representation from each of our 8 elementary and TK8 schools. They each get 2 teacher representatives that are voting members of that committee. And they identified that the 5 curriculums. And then we asked for volunteers across the district of teachers in kindergarten through 2nd grade who would be interested in evaluating these materials and taking a look at them and determining which ones are best suited to our needs. And so the teachers who selected to participate in that process used a rubric and evaluated the 5 different materials in instruction and ease of use and what types of assessments are available and the data they produce. And they whittled it down to 2 curriculums that they thought might best meet our needs. They then went into each curriculum and found comparable lessons from each one, and they spent a week teaching each of the materials to determine, how easy is it actually to use? What types of materials need to be prepped? How much time does it take to prepare? How are the students responding to the instruction? Do they find it engaging? And so they've been evaluating the materials based on their firsthand experience. And they are actually meeting tomorrow to come back with the data that they've collected and make a recommendation to Elementary Curriculum Council on which one they think best meets our population's needs. And then Elementary Curriculum Council will share that information with their sites. And then the sites get to vote. Each site gets 2 votes. And then based on the information that we get on their recommendation, then we will go forward to the school board. And the school board receives the same presentation that we presented to Elementary Curriculum Council about the process that they went through and the information and the recommendations of the teachers and the committees. And then the school board determines whether or not to formally move forward with materials.
So is parental involvement really at the tier that Deanna was talking about when there were committees and parental involvement or invited at that point? Is that the first level there? And is there a parental involvement component at your level?
Yes, so typically if we were adopting a full comprehensive curriculum, we would also have parent meetings. Because this is a very small component of a curriculum, it'll be shared at the board meeting and parents can come provide input, and we will put the materials out for parent review. The board meeting part is a 2-part process where it is presented to the board that this is the information being considered and the materials that are being considered. They're then put out for public review. And then at the following meeting, the board makes their decision.
Thank you. Jessie has an interesting job because it has much to do with social aspects, I think, of school, unless maybe to do with classroom, and maybe I'm incorrect on that. But would you talk a little bit about what you do and where, say, social emotional learning fits into that?
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
Sorry.
That's okay. Okay. So the work that I do also fits into the classroom, but it also fits in home and it fits in our community. But when we talk about social emotional learning, I think a lot of people, there's some blurry lines in that space. And I want to stress that our goal is to help support well-rounded children, both academically, social emotionally, mentally, and really being able to give students the skills to be successful once they leave our wonderful system, when they work with within the bigger scope of the world. And so when we are looking at social emotional skills, a lot of people immediately kind of jump into the space of mental health, and it's not really in that world, although I do support that in our system, in school systems. We do support students with mental health and in our wellness centers. But when we think about social emotional learning in our systems, it's really coming back to those CASEL competencies, and it's working with students on how to build self-awareness, on how to build social awareness, the responsible decision-making, self-management, relationship skills. You know, it's those things that we teach little kids, how do I share? How do I, say, you know, how do I walk up to my friend and say, you know, that made me feel, not okay, I don't appreciate that. And it's also working with knowing my feelings. That made me angry. I don't like the way that made me feel, or today I'm really happy. I'm excited about that, and being able to recognize some of those spaces. And so, and then as we go over, or as we get older, anyone in middle school, anyone got middle school kids, grandkids, right? It's like, whoa, that feeling is a what? But how do I gauge that feeling? And my friend that likes me today and tomorrow they do not. How do I navigate that space? How do I have conflict resolution? How do I recognize my friendships? And how do I, when that person isn't my friend, and how do I do that space? And so working with students on being able to have the words to understand their feelings and their emotions, and to be able to have safe adults to go to, and to be able to understand when they need help, and being able to ask for that help. And so that's part of that social emotional support that we offer in schools. And when they get into high school, it's also about advocating, right? When as a high school student, I'm going to be on my own. I'm 17 years old, and all of a sudden now I'm going to be on my own, and I don't know how to go to the doctor and create an appointment when I'm feeling really upset, or I'm really anxious and I don't know how to push through that barrier. So it's really developing those skills and that language to help support students around those competencies. And so it's not just it's not about diagnosing, it's not about putting students in boxes. It's about developing the skills they need to navigate the world outside of academics, because it's those two pieces that work together. We can have students that are amazing and geniuses and book smart and can, solve the Pythagorean theorem and do all the stuff. But if they can't have those conversations, and they can't navigate the world, and they can't use the language to ask for help, then they're stuck. And so it's really blending those two systems together, and being able to help support them in that space. And so that's one of the roles that I do. And we do also have students that do need that higher level of care, and we help them in our wellness centers. We help them with our CBO partners. I'm going to shout out Julie in the back. She's one of our connections to mental health. And so we also have a layered support. It's you might hear the MTSS word a lot and people throw it around, but it's multi-tiered support systems of support. And it's helping students build foundations. It's helping students that need additional support. And then it's really wrapping around and giving that big hug for kids that really need that additional support. So we really try and help the full spectrum of students.
Thank you. So now we're moving to the teachers who are boots on the ground in the classroom, trying to deliver this curriculum and also help the kids navigate some of these other social issues that are a big part of everybody's life, whether you're in school or in the workforce or whatever. If you can't get along with your peers, you're kind of in a problem. So Avery teaches AP Literature, College Placement English, and Ethnic Studies at Sobrato. So before you talk about Ethnic Studies, which is probably really our hot button here, tell me a little bit about how you make choices for what's being taught in your Lit and English classes. I'm assuming that you have a framework of things to teach, but do you have the freedom to choose what the reading material is, what books kids will be reading, what essays, whatever the current non-printed terminology might be?
Yeah, so when it comes to English, again, I'll try and be kind of like as quick as I can. We have the Common Core state standards are kind of like that biggest guiding framework of what we teach in English, for example. So we have that set of standards, and I teach predominantly 12th graders. And so I'm looking at those 12th grade standards, and it's telling me this is what students need to know how to be able to do by the time that they graduate. And then obviously within our whole English department, we're working collaboratively from 9th grade to 12th grade to make sure that students are set up at every level to greet them where they come in after 8th grade, and then graduate them with a more advanced set of those skills. So that's like kind of the big picture. And then we also have a list of approved primary and supplemental texts for all grade levels. So when we want to potentially incorporate a new text, like a novel, for example, that we want to read, we would go through the process of getting that approved as an option essentially. But within all of the options that we then have a lot of choice in terms of how we, which of those books, for example, we would choose to read. And I think for me, the main kind of thought that goes into that is we're operating on the basis of what are the skills that kids need to learn. And so then the question for teachers is, how are you going to engage them in that learning in a way that's going to help them to learn those skills? So if it is something like, a research standard, looking at texts and evaluating them for their credibility, that's the skill. I would then get to say, okay, what sort of, articles am I going to provide kids to get them interested in looking through and deciding which of those are more reliable sources of information and which aren't. So if that answers that question, I would say that's.
So it's my understanding that ethnic studies has been an elective until, well, right now, currently it's an elective, but in the fall, it becomes part of core curriculum. Is that correct? I think that it is, or it's a mandatory subject.
Not exactly. So this is the first year that we are offering ethnic studies. But it went through a development and approval process for about 2 years before that. So really we're on year 3 of the whole thing, but this is the first year that it's offered as a class for students to take. This year it is an elective. Next year it's also going to be an elective. 9th graders who are entering high school in the 2025 to 2026 school year, those 9th graders will have to take it before they graduate high school. So over the next few years, it's going to become, I would say more and more kind of sections of that class each year as it becomes required for students that are coming up to take it at some point before they graduate. But it is a requirement in the state of California that the course is offered in all schools next year.
Could you talk a little bit about what the material is in ethnic studies?
Yes, and actually over there on the table, there's printed copies of the entire approved curriculum, course framework, if anybody wants to look at that. So somewhere, it's like the big stack of printed, lots of pages. Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
I just wanted to know what ethnic studies looks like in the classroom. Tell me what's going on between you and the students when you're out of classroom.
Okay. That feels like a big question, but I will. Sorry, no big questions. No, that's okay. Just because there are so many pieces. So if you're looking at the course framework, you'll see that we decided to organize the ethnic studies course thematically. So other ethnic studies courses are sometimes organized, for example, by racial or ethnic group, and we did not do that. We chose to organize it by theme, to kind of create a progression where some foundations were built early that then developed into more complex topics over time. So our units are essentially separated thematically. If I can summarize what our course looks like in as broad but also specific a way as possible, I would say it's in some ways a blend of English, history, and art. If you're going to compare it to other subjects, it really is its own entire subject, which is why it's gone through such a process to really build a curriculum that we feel good about. But a lot of, it's pretty discussion oriented, I would say, discussion oriented, community oriented, very, very student driven in the sense that we are approaching these broad topics and then giving students a lot of choice in terms of where within that they would like to focus their more specific studies so that they can really be driven by the things that they're excited about and passionate about, while also learning about those broader skills and concepts. So for example, looking at something like, how do you read a map and how do you look at maps that have changed over time and how can you see the way that reflects the movement of people, but then the students could decide on a group of people that they want to look at specifically and say, you know, where have these people moved around and what has caused that change? So very discussion oriented, very student driven. Definitely requires more reading than I would say other electives do, because there is a lot of connecting their foundation in history to experiences of race and ethnicity. And so that's kind of like taking what they've built in their other classes and finding ways that they can explore that. Not necessarily just in more depth, but also kind of take like an alternate perspective from that like more factual viewing and look at what have people's experiences have been, how can I learn about somebody's culture other than my own, what is my own experience. So it's kind of like a different look at, or a different way to learn about things that have happened in history. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very helpful. So we're moving on to Tammy Miller, who is the lucky winner of the human reproduction class for middle school. So I'm going to ask you questions about that, or ask you to just talk about it. But one of the things that has occurred to me of late, after a friend told me that the average start of young women into MENARC is now 9 or 10, which made me wonder whether 6th, 7th, and 8th grade might be a little late on the human reproduction component. So I don't know whether you can weigh in on that, or if you just want to go for it.
Okay, so starting with that. I mean, a big reason for that is because of our food. I mean, the hormones in the foods that we eat, that is what's kicking particularly young ladies into early menstrual cycles. It is something that I do talk about in my classes, but I mean, there isn't too much of a need for the human reproduction aspect of it to, and from my perspective, to be taught any earlier, because just because the girls might be jumping into puberty earlier than they historically have in the past. I mean, but that's also a decision that's not going to be made by me. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to start developing the other aspects for why we have the curriculum in middle school. And another big aspect of why we do it in 7th grade is because that's just when they are more mature to handle the material, to the topic. I mean, the first time you say penis or vagina in class and they all just use their little minds. So if you start doing that any earlier, I just don't feel like they would have the mental capacity, the maturity level to handle it. But again, that's just my personal opinion. I don't really get a say on what grade level they teach this at. I just got put into it, and that's what I've been doing for the last 8 years.
So have you seen, has the curriculum changed much over those 8 years, or is it, it's hard for me to see how human reproduction would change much.
Yeah,
But is the way it's taught changed?
oh, yes, it has changed quite a bit actually, because when I first came into it, before we started NGSS, the Next Generation Science Standards in California, they just had a textbook. In middle school, all the science curriculum was divided up by content. So it started with 6th graders were earth science, 7th graders were biology, and then 8th graders were physical science. So in those old textbooks, it was a very natural progression, because we started off with how plants reproduce, and then how animals reproduce, and then we got to how, started even before plants. We started how cells develop and multiply or divide. So how cells reproduce, and then plants, and then animals, and then ending the year with humans. So it was a nice progression and a nice development in biology. Now because of NGSS, it's kind of like this, they took all the science standards and just, 52 card pickup, and where does it land? So now with 7th grade science, we get chemistry, earth science, a little biology, a little physics. We do a little bit of everything. But the human reproduction standard was still thrown in there at 7th grade. So it's not the really smooth progression, and it's not in the textbooks that we adopted when we started NGSS. So we use HMH for 7th, 8th, and I believe it goes into high school as well. I believe from 6th to 12th grade, or yeah, to 12th grade, I think they're still using HMH at the high school level, but still, once we adopted that, we also started the curriculum with Positive Prevention Plus. So that was actually brought in by Planned Parenthood. So they gave us the textbooks, the student workbooks, which I had left over there in front of my box of organs. And so they have given us the content for that. So it's no longer just about human reproduction. It's also the content is also about just building healthy relationships. It covers a lot of abuse and bullying and yeah, just like I said, just building healthy relationships, whether that's them learning how to have healthy friendships, but also healthy romantic relationships. So knowing the difference between something that is loving and caring versus something that might be more toxic and could potentially lead to a violent domestic situation. So them just knowing the difference between those healthy and non-healthy relationships.
Thank you. So Sunny teaches government and politics and all of that sort of thing, and AP psychology, which is where I understand there's some interesting curriculum involving gender studies. Is that correct, or am I mistaking that with a different area?
That might be a different area.
So talk a little bit about what happens in AP psychology.
Okay, so yeah, I might not be the best person to have on this panel because I do teach AP, both AP Gov and Politics and AP Psych. I have no say in what I'm trying. I mean, everybody's, working off of standards, but in particular, the whole reason for the courses is to give kids this chance to pass an AP test and hopefully, do it well enough to get credit and not have to take it in college, right? So it's a lot of information and we just like pile it on them. Obviously, the issue though, I mean, it does come up, sex and gender and whatnot. I don't know if it's particularly interesting. Maybe if we have do you have any specific questions about it?
No, I'm just trying to get a feel for what happens in a psych class at the high school level.
So there are actually two different levels. So I teach AP Psych, and then we actually also have sort of an on level psych class. And I was hoping that the teacher would come, but she couldn't make it. So that is slightly different. AP, it is heavily geared towards the neurobiology, brain, that kind of stuff. With a unit on development. But yeah, I would be happy to answer questions about it, but it is pretty much like, this is what the AP God said to do, and this is what we're gonna do.
I like that, the AP gods.
Yeah.
So now we have actually a couple of students, and I would love for Kaylin and Ish to talk. I believe you're both in ethnic studies, perhaps. No, neither one of you. Okay, well, so tell us about your high school experience in making your way through these different classes and curriculum that sometimes seem pretty rudimentary and sometimes seem maybe a little more emotionally complex. Kaylin, you want to start?
So I'm in my junior year, which is known to be like the worst year, the hardest. Yeah. So about high school, at least for right now, I feel like I've kind of heavy loaded on APs and like some GPA boosters because that's kind of like the demand to get into college now is you need to like how do you do more than like everyone else, right? So a lot of right now is a lot of me just loading, but I do like the thought of taking some CP classes because I feel like more in a CP class, you're allowed to just learn to learn, like just expand your knowledge. And I feel like learning to just retain something for like an AP test is so much easier for it to leave your mind. And I feel like, what do you learn from it more than anything? Because you get college credit, but it's like, if it's on if you're gonna do that in your major, then you're gonna have to retake the class anyways, versus where sometimes in my CP classes, so I take CP history, I don't take, A-push or AP, the AP version, and what I find is, I do like learning what happened to, like, to get here, to get to this point. I also find that I'm so busy and stressed with my AP classes that it's hard to take that knowledge and retain it and like learn something from it. Because what everyone knows is you have to do well in these AP classes, you have to do that. So I feel like kind of going through that in high school is kind of hard because from being a freshman, my freshman year, Serato didn't have any APs for freshmen. Unless you took some courses like, over summer. And I was a freshman straight out of the pandemic. So I went from online to a new school, new world. But, yeah, so I really like that, like in biology, in the classes I had to take, there's science, math, I could just learn to get better at it, not just to retain something for one test, because it all comes down to that one AP test, and that if you don't do well, it's like a big shot to your confidence, versus you being like, I did this the whole year, I got a good grade, and like, that should matter more, but in a way, it's kind of informed. So I kind of like learning just to learn, so I see the value of like, taking some CP classes and taking AP classes, but that's how my high school has kind of been going, just because I feel like the pressures of getting into college, getting into trying to excel, and it's like, if you don't get into like these big name colleges, it's like people, maybe not adults, but kids from your peers, you do hear more of the, like, oh, like, that's all you did, when in reality, it's like, but what if I retained so much more than you? What if I learned throughout high school more than you? So that's kind of my high school, just kind of going through expectations and trying to balance what I really want to do and how I want to like expand my knowledge to become a more knowledgeable person, versus trying to just learn curriculums and like not know how to apply it, not know how to learn that to like talk to other people and stuff like that. So that's mainly how I'm kind of navigating through high school.
So I'm just gonna clarify, yes, I'm just about to clarify what is CP and AP.
Oh,
So I'll do that because I think I know, since I had to look it up myself. AP is advanced placement, and if you successfully complete the class, I believe you get college credit.
And you have to score,
If
you have to score on the exam.
Yes. So if you do AP psychology, in theory, you would not have to repeat it at San Jose State. But maybe you would if you were going to be a psych major, but that's what AP is. CP is college placement or college prep. College prep classes are designed to educate kids and then have them be ready to go to the next level of their education. So before we move on to Ish, maybe could you talk a little bit, reflecting back on, say, your middle school experience when human reproduction came online? And also, I think, I could be, it's been very long since I had kids in school, but I think marriage in the family or some version of it happens at the high school level. That this is a graduation requirement, I think. No, it's not. Wow. How do you make your way in the world?
Sex education was taught in physical education.
Okay. Yeah, so marriage in the family or its equivalent is an elective, yeah, okay. So could you, either one of you talk about whether you've taken an elective like that, and also what was middle school human reproduction like in terms of the giggle factor?
So in high school, at least, I haven't taken classes that talk upon that topic. I've taken the course, like they have to teach it during PE, so I've gone through that. And then I think they first started bringing up issues kind of in fifth grade, like very lightly. And then middle school was kind of weird for me, just because that was when COVID hit. So I started trying, like I had to learn online, and it's like you know, it's hard to retain and stuff and pay attention as a middle schooler. But in high school, I feel like they mostly just talk about, they talk about like relationships, stuff like that. I feel like that's what I mostly started retaining from that. They talk very like lightly, I feel like, on like stuff like when you have like sex and stuff like that. So they talk very lightly upon that, but I mostly remember relationships and safe, like, having a safe adult, stuff like that, yeah. Yeah.
Trusted adults, yes. So Ish, can you talk about any of these aspects of your high school or middle school education, please?
Okay, so similar to Caitlin, I would say that personally, I'm sorry, similar to Caitlin, I would say that personally, throughout high school, I mean, I also, just to clarify this, I'm a sophomore at Sequoia, and I did go to Gilroy. I went to a Gilroy school before this. I went to GECA, if any of you are familiar with that. So through going to GECA and like generally throughout my educational experience, I've always like felt like I really like learning. I really love taking challenging courses, and I was even able to, like, in middle school, progress to the next grade. So I was able to skip 7th grade, but I still took that curriculum of sex ed and education.
I dragged you back.
With Miss Miller, who's right here. But along with that, along the way, I've really found my passion for learning and what I like to do within these subjects. However, I have felt very similar to Caitlin here, that within this, there's a great competition with peers that has led to kind of a different development to what I would like to go and see within my educational system, and also just the pressure they place upon you and within that. So an example of this is they now offer AP Human Geography, which is a course that kind of builds onto ethnic studies in a sense. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Schreiner, but I do think that the course itself does talk a bit about history, which I currently take by book. So it talks about history and culture. It does dabble into other topics that I think is taught currently in ethnic studies. But overall, I would say that course gives like a good summative understanding to freshmen who are just now entering high school, where you do not know their historical information, like what they've learned previously. So it gives them like a good general idea as to like what a history course might look like at the high school level, and then like what this might be for taking AP World History or just a World History after that. But currently, I feel as though there's a great pressure to go and take AP subjects in high school, not only to impress colleges, but to impress your peers, to impress your parents, to impress your principal. Like, how am I going to get into a good college if I've not taken hard courses? But these courses put a lot of pressure on me. So how do I deal with that? And then how do I deal with the pressures of other people being better at those subjects? So all of those questions flood my brain a lot. And I'm fortunate to have an older sister who went to Sabrata. So she's been able to help me navigate this entire process. But alongside that, to keep it short, I personally feel like there's a great pressure and a great emphasis on taking advanced placement subjects, whether that be if you're interested in them or just to take it for the GPA boost. And I would like to explore that a bit.
Thank you. Before we get to Kat here on the end, there are cards. If you want to write a question down and hand it in, please take the opportunity to write some. And then Nancy will collect them and we'll work through them and ask the people. So Kat is not part of the school district, but she is on our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee with AAUW. And so I wanted her to talk about the importance of that. And I think she will explain the pink tape.
I will explain the pink tape. But first, I think it's important to recognize that not everybody is on the track of AP. And that's why diversity is so important. I don't know if we have statistics of how many students are not in AP, but a majority are not. And so when you talk about Michigan, talking about she feels that pressure of competition, imagine someone who doesn't see themselves even graduating from high school or going to college. And so if you see somebody who's a high achiever, and you don't feel like you are that high achiever, sometimes you just give up. And we can't let any children give up. So I think I'm involved in talking about diversity because we have to reach every child where they are. And so the purpose of this pink tape that I'm going to get up because I developed a curriculum for 3rd grades about 6 years ago, working with the Morgan Hill Historical Society. And it was very important because I'm Native American. And I didn't see anybody who looked like me, and I certainly didn't hear anybody talking about Native Americans. So we're going to talk about the AAUW-MHUSD that have been here for over 12,000 years. Here's 12,000. 12,000 years. I'm walking people to all the schools And I say the Native Americans have been here for 12,000 years. The Spanish came in 1769. Now, what I did is this 24 feet, each foot represents 500 years. And I do this so that third graders can understand that because I'm a former elementary school teacher, and we have to be concrete. They have to see that. So when I say 12,000 years, I'm saying thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. And can I borrow your two fingers? Two more. Thousands. And thousands. So we know that Native Americans have been here for over 12,000 years, but the Spanish came in 1769. And so third graders know subtraction and they know it's only 255 years. So if you're Native American, you can stand anywhere on this. If you're Spanish, you can start at the last foot, the last 6 inches, because that's about 250 years. If you're anyone else, you have to stand in the last 4 inches. And that is really important to understand. Who's been here longer? But curriculum doesn't talk about the 12,000 years. It talks about the last 4 inches. And one other thing that happens is we are not Indians. We did not come from India. We are first. Raise your hands proudly if you're from India. All right. But we are Native Americans. We are first people. We are indigenous people. And so when you get discouraged, when you don't see yourself in the AP class, we have to meet that diversity by encouraging people to be proud of who they are. And you only do that when you talk to people about that. When you talk at the beginning, first grade, second grade, third grade, you talk about being Native American, and just as you would talk about being Latino or Chinese or Japanese, whatever community you're from. And so one thing that probably nobody ever thinks about is that there are no federally recognized tribes in Santa Clara County, none. But we have been here for over 12,000 years. So my question is, how many of you were born in Morgan Hill? Oh, no. Only one. How many of you were born in Santa Clara County? Very few. So that means most of you came from somewhere else. But the Native Americans from here, the AAUW-MHUSD, have been here. And yet you look around, and when is anybody talking about the Native Americans from here? How can you expect to respect any culture, any tradition, any language if you don't acknowledge the first people? So that's why diversity really, really matters. So when I talk to third graders, I ask them, how brave can you be? Can you be brave? Can you be brave? Can you be brave? And they all raise their hands. And I say, if you see someone making fun of somebody because of their language, because of their traditions, because of their food, are you brave enough to say, stop that, because that's my friend? Third graders say they're brave enough. So the real question is, are all of you brave enough to advocate for not just Native Americans, but for every community that has come here? And that's why I think it's so important to talk about this curriculum. It's so important to talk about diversity. How many of you have had corn? Do you like it? How many of you have had tortillas? How many of you have had the most important one? This is what my grandkids say, chocolate. That all comes from the Americas. But do most people know that? No. And that's why it's really important to talk about diversity, because it matters how you talk about food, how you talk about tradition, how you talk about culture. And if we did that more at younger ages, we would have more successful graduates of children of color, and we would have more appreciation of everybody's language, and especially the food. So that's why it's really important to have diversity. Thank you.
So the first question is for Deanna and Julie. Well, thank you for running the mic. Yes. How's the curriculum benefiting students who are really smart and learn fast? Because in my experience, they are being left behind.
That's a really good question. A very excellent question.
I think that, the curriculum, one of the things, I'm gonna talk global and then we can get into specifics, right? So one of the things that we look at when we're looking at curriculum is not only does it address the standards, right, which are what the students are expected to know and do, but we also look for how does it support students who need additional support, including students that, need enrichment activities and engaging activities if they've mastered the content. That's one of the ways that we ensure that there are resources for teachers to be able to use to engage that. But I think that I can't speak for our teachers, and maybe they want to take a crack at the question about, I know that a lot of our teachers work very diligently to work and understand where every student is, to give them just-in-time support, but also include those challenging tasks that are going to engage students and make them stretch and grow.
Thank you. So the next question is for Julie. How does the independent study curriculum compare to the curriculum we currently use? And why do we have two curriculum options? Where and how is the independent curriculum used? And so I'm coming from a position of no knowledge about what this question means. Maybe, I hope you do.
So according to the state, independent study curriculum is supposed to be equal to, the rigor that is happening in the classroom. The missing factor often is that we don't have a teacher standing in front of a student when they do an independent study work. However, that's taken into consideration when a student is put on to independent study, long-term independent study. And so for us, our independent study program does have a teacher component that goes with it, and that often is missed in a lot of districts. Most of the time, it's just they're put on a digital curriculum and they're kind of left to do that digital curriculum alone, and they check in maybe once a week or they check in once every other week to make sure that they're on track of doing the work independently. However, here in Morgan Hill, we work with students, they do independent study for a set amount of time, checking in daily with the teachers until that teacher feels that they're able to do that work independently. And then we progress monitor the work that they're doing to ensure that they're staying on track. If a student starts to fall off track, then we do sort of what we call like a re-intake. So we re-intake that student to talk about what supports they need to be able to get back on track in independent study. And to then help support them. If they need to come back and be meeting with a teacher daily, then they can do that. If they need to be twice a week, they can do that. In addition, our independent study curriculum is vetted, and it's an A through G requirement. So for our high schools, middle schools and high schools, it's A through G. It meets that requirement for them to graduate. And then in our elementaries, we use a program called Edmentum. And it also is a curriculum that goes through the same process that Dr. Jimenez and Dr. Geary went through, that they go through the same process to bring in that curriculum that students go through. It's just the digital version. So a lot of our students like to play games on the computer. And so a lot of those activities where they'll read some work, they answer some questions, they might finish a module. And so it's very similar in that space.
Why would a kid be in independent study? What are those circumstances?
All of our kids learn differently. And so some of our students, they might engage better with that mode of learning. Some of our students might have high anxiety around big, large groups, and in a classroom isn't the best conducive space for them to learn. We have some families that are, we have a lot of actually Olympic athletes. You may not know that, but we have a lot of Olympic athletes in our district, and they travel a lot. And so being out of the classroom isn't something that they're out of the classroom a lot. And so being on independent study, they're able to compete in all of their things that they do. And so then they can still get their education that way. We actually have a couple also child actors and models that also do independent study. So there's a variety of reasons that students go on it. I know you would know that, right? That they go on independent study, but we as a district want to offer, we have a variety of different ways that students can learn, and we want to help meet students where they are. And so if independent study is a better way for students to learn, and we can meet them in that space, and that is the best way for them to learn and show success, then we want to be able to provide that opportunity for students.
Thank you. This question is for Deanna or Julie. What curriculum is currently adopted and used for math? Given the last 3 years of academic decline in state test scores, how are we planning to reassess the current math curriculum?
It's a really good question. How long do we have? So we have a curriculum that was adopted, probably I'm gonna say between the 2015 or 2016. One of the things that I shared at the very beginning, right, if you missed it, was about the frameworks, right? So we have new standards and frameworks about mathematics. That framework was just adopted in July 2023, so last summer, right? And so, but the materials and adoption cycles have to wait for the framework before the publishers list is released, right? So we are waiting for the California Department of Education to conduct their instructional quality reviews so that they can offer the districts that publishers list that meets with the new frameworks that were just adopted last summer. And so once they release that, they will begin the process of looking at those materials and begin our own adoption process, which will incur, you know, making sure that our teachers have access to the materials, collect evidence, have public input and parental input. But the first step to that is waiting for the California Department of Education to release that publishers list.
Okay, thank you. So this next card has 4 questions on it. So we'll try to work through them fairly quickly. So for Deanna, who sits on the standard and frameworks committee and how are they chosen?
The California, you mean the California Department of Ed in the broad scope?
Yes.
Yes. So the California Department of Education puts out an all bulletin that is sent to county offices of education, universities, community-based organizations and districts soliciting folks to apply. So you have to apply to be part of the framework or the standards review. I was part of the last World Languages review. You have to submit an application. That application is vetted through the California Department of Education, and then the recommended applicants are then presented to the State Board of Education, who then approves who those candidates are. Usually those committees are between 20 to 25 people, and they're a good cross-section of everybody who participates in our educational system, right? From community partners to teachers, to administrators, to county offices of education.
Thank you. This next question is for either Jesse or one of the teachers. What portion of a typical school day is given to social emotional skills compared to reading, math, and science?
So for the elementaries, we do about 20 minutes a day, depending on the day and the curriculum. Some teachers do a little bit more. If it's a day we're seeing a lot of emotions in a class, the teacher might focus a little bit more. We also encourage students to have, you know, to think about their classroom in a space that they might do some restorative work. They might start the day with circle and build relationships with students. So when we think about social emotional learning, it also might be about relationship building. So dedicated time is kind of hard to say, but about 20 minutes, I would say, give or take. In middle school and high school, we have advisory, and so they use their advisory time, and that's once a week to sort of help support social emotional learning. But we also have our wellness spaces, and they do different activities during the week to help promote student well-being and wellness and things like that. So they have that during lunch and brunch and break at different times in different spaces. And you guys can talk about it.
At the middle school, at least for Britain Heights, I'm assuming Martin Murphy is about the same, but at Britain, we devote 20 minutes once a week to a specific class period. So our third period every Wednesday is 20 minutes longer, so that every kid for those 20 minutes is getting that SEL lesson for the week. So at Britain, it's 20 minutes a week.
Any other teachers want to say anything about that? Okay. Okay, this question is for Avery. Are high school ethnic studies materials focused only on Black American history?
No, definitely not. I also was looking, just maybe people want to check. I was looking at the prints over there, and the one that I picked up seemed like it maybe had some pages missing. So if you're looking at yours and you feel like there's pages missing, you can also find it on the MHUSD website, and it should be complete. So if there feels like there's a gap in there somewhere. No, absolutely not only focused on the experiences of Black Americans. Like I said, and I hope that this answers the question, we specifically chose not to organize the course in that
way that some classes do, which is by racial or ethnic group, because we felt that within that, there's such a capacity to be leaving out specific experiences of smaller racial and ethnic groups that like often do get left out of that conversation. And so our goal with the way that we structure most of our lessons and projects and learning opportunities for students is to look at a concept and then provide students as many opportunities as they can to apply that concept to any racial or ethnic group that is relevant to it or that may have experienced it, to kind of apply that learning and see how they can learn about the specific experiences of a group of people. So we try as much as we can to provide a like diverse set of materials and articles or resources or whatever it may be, so that students feel like they can see themselves represented, that they can learn about groups that they are not a part of. And also so that we're making sure that we are representing as many groups as we can who have lived those experiences within the United States.
Okay, thank you. This is for, I think, Julie and Tammy. What do, and the psychology teachers, what do the biology and psych classes teach about LGBTQ and genders and activities?
Can you repeat that one more time?
What do biology and psych classes teach about LGBTQ plus genders and activities?
Okay, so the only area that it's taught in middle school explicitly would be in the human reproduction curriculum. There is, in the workbook, there's one lesson that covers LGBTQ plus content explicitly. And it's, I'm not gonna lie, kind of vague, just because of our basic terms. It's all about the different terminology, like it's just very vocabulary heavy. And then we just talk about how the lesson does cover statistics on bullying for LGBTQ plus students, and just the statistics on it historically. And then how the main takeaway of that particular lesson is, don't judge and, be inclusive.
Oh, God.
Yes, just the two of you.
Okay, so can you say the question again?
Going back to the card. What do biology and psych classes teach about LGBTQ plus gender and activities? I guess by that they mean activities within. I don't want to read into it. I don't know what they mean.
Well, just so you know, because I can only, say so much up here. The Sobrato, AP Psych teacher, sent over her textbook, right? It's over there. Yeah. Well, so what I'm saying is if you'd like to see it, to actually flip through and see what it is the kids are reading, you can. Their units are organized slightly differently, but it's the same words. I will say this, the whole course is, if not focusing on, like I said, sort of like the science of it, or rather the biology behind it, it's focusing on research methods, it's focusing on the history of the field itself and the theories that have come about. That said, so what happens is when it brings up a particular topic, what it'll do is kind of come at it from those angles. So it doesn't necessarily say, so like with regard to sexual orientation, for example, it looks at how homosexuality, and again, it's just we're looking at a few little pages because we have other things to do. But it comes at it from, respectfully, the historical views of it, how it used to be considered a mental disease, if you will, And then, how that's changed, and then various, research that's been done, to determine, what's going on, et cetera, with any particular, orientation. So I don't really know how to say this without, or, quickly and in a nutshell. It's vague, while being also very specific again about things like, how has the field itself treated it? And how has society treated these, without making any conclusions on its own? Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. This question's for Julie. What is taught about sex education in kindergarten through third grade?
So sex education is not in the standards until 5th grade, so it's not taught in kindergarten through 3rd grade.
Thank you.
That's easy.
Okay. Um, This has acronyms on it that maybe you can interpret. For Julie also. F and P level guide is currently used in our kindergarten classes. It's been proven F and P approach isn't rooted in science of reading. Why was it decided to use F and P thus far, and is there a plan to phase it out entirely? I can't translate this question.
I can.
So you can, good.
I can. So FMP is short for Fontes and Pinnell, and that is the publisher of a level literacy assessment and intervention tool. And it has been used historically in our district for quite some time. We are in the process of investigating other assessment tools and methods. As I mentioned, we're in the process of looking at phonics curriculum. We recently started using a phonemic awareness and phonological awareness curriculum that has assessment tools built in as well. Within the last year, we started using iReady reading assessments across the district, starting in kindergarten. So we are in the process of evaluating our assessment tools and making sure that we have the correct tools to assess the students' skills that will inform the teacher's instruction. And we're constantly evaluating and determining if we need to continue with some of the assessments we have, or maybe transition them out for other assessments. So it's an ongoing conversation that we're having with Elementary Curriculum Council in collaboration with the teachers.
Okay, thank you. Question for Avery and possibly Sunny, although I think just Avery. Oh, this is Avery, yes. Can you please explain more about the indigenous studies? And the question also says, can you explain the book? And I assume this is a question about the textbook, perhaps? Can you say anything about the text for ethnic studies?
Yes, so one of our supplemental texts, the 3 books that were approved as part of the core curriculum are the textbook, and then the 2 supplemental texts, one of which is an Indigenous Peoples History of the United States, which Nancy is over there. So I'm gonna be really honest. This has been the year that we've been developing this whole curriculum, and that has not been a book that we have used a lot this year. We're hoping to use it more in the future, but it has been a really time-consuming process to build an entirely new curriculum and try to make it as engaging and meaningful as we can with the students that we have. So as far as the book goes, it hasn't been a huge part of our curriculum this year. I will try to answer the question about like learning about Indigenous people, and I hope I do, and if I don't, tell me. But the thing that comes to mind is that I had just seen students do some really amazing exploration this year into different aspects of Indigenous history and culture in the United States. And like I said, a lot of that has been very student driven. So for example, first semester, we had a selection of independent novels that students could choose to read based on what their interest levels were. And one of those was The Firekeeper's Daughter, which I don't know if any of you have read it. It's really, really good young adult novel about a young Indigenous girl. And it really talks about like her heritage and her culture and her experiences within that. And so some students read that and they were really interested in that story and had a lot of great questions come out of it. Another book was They're There by Tommy Orange, which is about Oakland, I believe, and tells the story of indigenous youth in Oakland. They really liked reading that. We had students do maps during our immigration unit, in which they looked at specific Native American tribes and their original land versus the land that they predominantly occupy now, and kind of like, why has that shift happened? What was that experience, the forced migration element of that story they looked at and talked about. Students have done projects looking at coverage of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and kind of examined, is that story being completely told in the media, and where can we look to find out like a deeper story than we often get from the mainstream, because it's not something that is covered as often as it should be. So all of those are examples of how students have taken what we've talked about in class and explored it with a focus specifically on the Indigenous experience. And I think a lot of them have done some really meaningful learning, and it's been great to watch how they've, heard about something and then said like, oh, I don't really know about that. What can I go and learn more about it? And I feel like a lot of them have had their eyes opened to that in a way that is different than what they have learned about in school, which I think focuses on a very specific kind of period of time. So if that helps answer that.
So I also had another question with that. Is any Indigenous peoples involved in the particular curriculum that is sent to the school districts? Or is it just somebody saying, hey, this is a neat book, here you go, read this? Or is there a community or a tribe that's involved in saying, hey, you know what? This is actually beneficial because this really happened. Because for instance, even books that we have here at the library, we as Indigenous people start to read to say, oh, that's not the truth. Oh, that's not the truth. So is there any Indigenous people that are involved in the curriculum that is sent for our children to learn?
That's a great question. I can talk about kind of the way that the curriculum was developed, if that's helpful. But also, if you, on a personal note, if you have any suggestions, I would love to hear that, some things that you think would be meaningful. So the curriculum, sorry, can you guys hear me? I realize this was like, okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude, but I felt like that was a very important.
Good question. Yeah. And that's a caption way in on it as well.
Yeah.
If you want to go.
Sure. So in terms of just some background on the curriculum development, we started about 2 years before the start of this school year with developing the curriculum. And that was a very long process that, if I could sum it up super quickly, involved looking at what was shared as some of the model framework for California ethnic studies, but then also looking at every school district that we could find that had existing long-standing ethnic studies programs and seeing what they did and the texts that they used and the way that they approach these different subjects, putting that together with what we know about the Morgan Hill community and our students, and evaluating all of the texts and resources kind of together to build our curriculum that we wanted to get approved. And then within that, there was also a year-long kind of committee that had counselors, teachers, administrators, district office personnel, community members, students involved in giving all of their input to the curriculum. And I know that it was a very diverse group of people. I don't specifically have an answer to if there was or wasn't someone who was Indigenous that was part of that group, because I don't want to say that there was or wasn't and be wrong.
I think that would be a very beneficial to actually have somebody be able to speak their truth.
Yeah.
And I know everybody's gonna have their own opinion of that, but the truth is the truth.
Yeah.
And I feel that, as our Indigenous children go to school, they would like for them to be informed about specifically. And even as of now, certain things that are taught about Thanksgiving, I pull my children out because that's false.
Yeah.
That is a whole false. So it's at the beginning of their learning journey that they're given falsified information. And that in turn is not allowing them to feel where they fit in the whole spectrum of even in education or life as it is, because they feel like, oh, well, this staff in here, this is not correct. So wait until they get into high school and then college and they say, oh, this was a lie the whole time. And it's not about anybody specific or a group. But if we are gonna educate our children, because our children are our future, I feel that it is very important to have somebody, you know, like Chad is a very brilliant woman, you know, Pat and I work together, so, oh no, you're very brilliant, I'm very honored to know you. And, we step in and we do something called the Multicultural Festival, and we're very honored to do that, and we go, and we show the children our culture and the stuff that we have, and we don't bring out because that's not really the place when they're that little, but we do bring out, you know, the basics. So I would ask, what do you want, or what do you want your children to be taught? And I said, teach them about bargaining. She said, you don't have to teach them about if they're being taught of Thanksgiving and they had dinner together and they were best friends, because that was not the case. So I think that is, I think it should be, very beneficial to have some of the indigenous people or indigenous people, because believe it or not, there's a lot of them.
Okay, and I'd like to turn this over, a microphone over to Kat to talk about that issue. And another sentence.
I was just gonna say, thank you, and that as we move the curriculum forward, we're looking hopefully toward the opportunity to get as many like guest speakers and community participants as we can, because we've done that a little bit this year and it's been like so awesome for them. So that's something that I look forward to.
All right.
Yeah.
I have some good news for you. AB 1703 was passed, and that is dealing with a task force in each county that will be talking about Indian education. AB 1703 says Indian task force. We're working on, no, we got to change that word. But the bigger good news is that currently Santa Clara County, I am a member of it. We just had one of our meetings today and we are talking about curriculum and how we bring that curriculum to the school districts in Santa Clara County. So we are working on that. And we do have Native representation there, not just me. We have the Muwekma tribe, we have the Amamutsan tribe, and we're looking at other partners that can speak to that creation of the curriculum. And we already have 2 models. One is in Humboldt County and the other is in, I think, San Diego, and they started the model. And so we're working on that right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. This question is for Avery as well. Sorry, you're getting the hot stuff.
I think this one's dead.
Oh, that one's dead. Okay, so we'll just have to. run the
Nice, Jack.
Mike's back. Okay. So what do you say to people who believe that ethnic studies will create divisions among students?
But the students answered. Actually, I have another question.
It's on. I don't know if this is the best answer to this question, but I feel like there's more of a community in my ethnic studies class this year than there is normally in the other classes that I've taught. It's been just awesome. Like, I'm so proud of this class this year and the things that they've learned and the way that they have like grown together as students. But it's just, I don't want to say like that I think that fear is unfounded, but it has not been my experience at all. And I don't think that it's been the experience of my students. They're so welcoming to each other, encouraging of one another. They talk about things that are complicated, and sometimes challenging, but never in a way that is disrespectful, never in a way that is divisive. That's something that we've heard a lot, you know, this entire process of developing the courses. It's gonna be divisive. It's gonna teach kids to be angry at each other. It's going to, you know, all of those different things. And it just hasn't been what we've seen. They are very, very bright. They're very mature. They're very competent. They ask great questions. They communicate with each other. They're open-minded.
And I feel like they've all just felt like they could learn more about themselves and learn more about each other and learn more about things that they did not previously know about. And it just has not felt like that has even been a problem that I have had to consider. And I certainly think about it as a teacher, like how can they make sure that this is accessible to all kids? How can they make sure it's inclusive to all kids? But never has it felt like amongst themselves, there's any feelings of division or animosity or hostility toward one another. If anything, it's been kids being like, oh my God, like that kid is so smart. Like I want to learn about that so I can talk about it like they do. So I just haven't felt like that's been an issue.
You're working on getting.
Okay, I have about 4 more cards. I'd like to knock through them in, say, 10 minutes so that people have an opportunity to take a look at the materials over here that you maybe didn't get a chance to look at before. And Deanna, maybe you can address this question sort of related to what's here. If parents want to see curriculum, not going to have an opportunity to look through the many textbooks that are here, what is their best avenue to take a look at specific curriculum?
Yeah, any parent is welcome to look at the. Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, so I think your best avenue is to contact the school principal, right? The curriculum that's adopted is available to parents. It went through the adoption process, so you're more than welcome to look at it.
Nancy's getting her steps in. Okay, this is for the students. I want to give them an opportunity. Is the idea that the United States is a melting pot still taught in high school?
For any grade.
So as somebody who has been fortunate enough to take AP Human Geography, possibly ethnic studies next year. I will say that like the entire idea of that melting pot, I personally have felt as somebody who's of Indian culture, that I've been able to experience that like hands-on with having friends of multiple cultures and being able to be a part of student organizations and groups such as ASU at the school level, which is Asian Student Union. At my school as a club that I've been able to experience that, but also in terms of education in the classroom with AP Human Geography, we're able to explore multiple different cultures, and as well as like cultural customs. I feel like that comes more into play with my AP World class or AP World History class, which I'm currently taking as a sophomore. I see a lot more talk about like religions and cultural customs once again, and then also cultural dress, cultural clothing, just some of these aspects that make up a person's culture, but it's talked about in a very respectful way, and very, once again, kind of out of scientific lens, and rather than a very opinionated one. Yeah, that's how I've personally seen it.
I think my experience is a little more different from Ish, because I've taken human geography, but a lot of my experience with different cultures comes from, so I'm in band. I like in marching band, all these band things, and through how I think Ms. Anchana said, ethnic studies is taught is a lot of interaction, and I've learned that because being like a leader or whatever, it's taught you like how to work with different people, and everybody has their own experience, even at a young age like us. And I know for me, at least for me, I used to go to like elementary school, right? And then I used to like open my lunch because my food like smells, right? Smells different. It's not like the typical like sandwich that some people might eat. And it's like that was like my first like look at like, oh, this is different. And I think through mostly interacting with different people, different views, it's like a lot of this stuff may seem maybe controversial, but I think if you just say what you believe in a respectful way without like maybe like calling out someone else for being wrong or something, because that's just what they believe. I think that's how I've kind of navigated the different cultures and stuff, is mostly through interaction of different people who I never thought I would talk to or like wouldn't talk to. So for me, that's how I kind of learned about different cultures and things like that.
Okay,
Go ahead.
really quickly adding on to what Katie said about culture. I personally have also felt that at like a very young age, like you open your lunchbox and then people turn around and they're like, what are you eating? Like, or like, especially for Indian food, if you have not had it already, it's very like fragrant and all of this, and people turn around and they're like, that's not what I usually eat. And then they judge you, like, especially in elementary school, middle school as well. I like personally felt like I had to assimilate to the PB&J and then just like kind of leave it at that. But then as you grow up and as you go into high school, I feel like youth especially are able to like appreciate each other more, both like growing that understanding of one another through education, but also through just building peer-to-peer relationships and working with one another on a group project. And oh, you got to go and bring your food from your culture. And maybe I'm gonna go and try a bite. And maybe I'll try that with my family, and then maybe it spreads. So really building those connections, I feel like that has allowed me to like experience America as melting pot.
I'm not sure exactly who could best answer this. Can you define some of the terms used tonight, specifically how these are taught to students? What is equity? How is that distinct from equality?
Can we physically demonstrate?
But wait, let's give them a chance, and then if you want to do a demonstration, that'd be great.
I mean, I think it goes, every one of us are gonna have a very different version, and I think that's part of equity. For me in student services, often I get the question of like, why didn't you do this for this kid and the exact same thing for this kid? And we see that a lot in discipline. And so for me, when I think about equity is we do what, we meet students where they are and help support them where they are and what they need. It's what that student needs in that moment at that time. So equity is meeting students where they are. Equality is doing the exact same thing for every student. And so, for example, in discipline, if I were to do the exact same thing for every student would be suspended for every single exact same thing in the exact same way, in the exact same da-da-da. But that's not the case, right? When we think about equity, we're meeting students where they are. So how do we support students in that space where their mental health's in play, or their home life's in play, their where they are in interventions in play, academically, we took all those pieces together, and that's an equitable approach to meeting students where they are. And so it's how do we help meet them in that space instead of providing equal.
And who at the table can define intersectionality?
No, that's an actual. I mean. Probably the only one.
I can speak to intersectionality in the way that I guess we've talked about it in class. So intersectionality as a, I feel like I'm giving it a talk. You should listen to Kimberly Crenshaw instead of mine. The definition of intersectionality is essentially, instead of examining people's identities and experiences as individual separate things, you look at them in terms of when people are experiencing multiple, how do they overlap together to create a unique experience for that person? So for example, like as a woman who is white, I would be looking at my race as an aspect of my identity, and my gender is an aspect of my identity. And because I have both of those things within myself, that creates an experience that for me would be different from, for example, like an Asian woman or somebody else or a man who is white, right? So intersectionality as a term just basically means that we think about all of the different pieces of our identity, our age and our citizenship and our religious affiliations, like all of these things. And then we as an individual experience all of those things together. We don't experience each one of them separately. And so how can we understand our own experience as like a holistic concept and not as each of those little pieces kind of broken apart?
Thank you.
That helps. If you feel like correcting me, please do.
So the next question is for Sunny. In her previous role as teaching world and US history, which,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So how are you teaching colonialism, power and privilege?
Oh, God. Not anymore, next. It depends. So actually, this brings it back to there was a question before about how you can see what the kids are supposed to be learning. So you can actually see, California, as I pull it from the phone, history, social science standards, and you can see it through, the whole deal. And you can see what they're supposed to be learning, including Actually, third grade specifically. Third grade specifically.
That's a teacher.
They talk about like, I don't teach third grade, I don't teach elementary school. But I'm just saying, you can see it all the way through, and you can see at what points, teachers can teach certain things. Now, I say can't, because if you look, and you should look, there are too many standards. And so they just are. And I teach AP, and you just, it's too much. And that's way more. So if you look, and actually, it turns out that most of these standards were in there as a suggestion. In other words, and then testing got involved, and then it was like, we need to teach all of these things. Right? Either way, what ends up happening is you can't spend very much time, stories, all those types of things. You can't spend very much time on any of that if you want to make sure that kids know about key, like the things that one would need to know to sound educated. That they know about the, like, for example, the Civil War and the two sides. I know adults that, for example, she's a woman with a master's who didn't know, were the Confederates in the South? Like she wasn't sure, because it wasn't like, you have so little time to cover anything. So the reason why I say that is because I'm very sensitive about that kind of stuff. And especially when I was teaching it, because I taught 8th grade at first, and we really, you know, when we studied the gold rush, we took that as an opportunity to be like, you know what, let's look at the impact of the gold rush on all, you know, different communities living there and what all. And you know, you try your best to bring in as many primary sources and, you know, examine it from different viewpoints. But the reality is you can only do so much of that if you want to make sure that same kid gets past the gold rush and makes it through Reconstruction. And if you look at the standards, they even pretend like you can get to World War I in 8th grade, and you can't. So it really does. So to bring it back to the standards, I'm just gonna say, like, you know, to put it in a nutshell, yes, I was cognizant of that. That was very much like teaching colonialism from multiple perspectives. You know, why is it happening? You know, zooming out to big picture, what's going on, economics, the whole deal, to what does it look like on the ground and how horrible is that, right? Okay. But it's sad, and that's actually one of the reasons I don't want to teach history anymore, because you can't do that. You simply can't give that kind of detail all the time, or enough. So to bring it back to the standards, though, we know, and we have to look at the standards. There's too many, which means that the teachers have to kind of pick and choose. And I will say that I do feel that most teachers, I don't even think teaching programs, especially when it comes to teaching history, social science, I don't think they're churning out teachers. I haven't come across any who are insensitive to that kind of stuff. So I think that they're trying, if anything, you know, they're trying to, you know, really make that human piece come alive. But they are sacrificing other information to do it. And it does become, it's up to the teacher, basically. It's up to the teacher. But they are still working with the standards that California said here, you know, base it on this. And that's what the textbooks are based on. Okay, it just depends on how much the teachers choose to focus on any given thing. But whatever they choose, there is something else they're not going to be able to get to.
Yeah.
And that's it. In AP, it's so much worse.
Yeah, exactly. So the last two questions are, we'll go back to Deanna to close out. So the first is, does the district have a plan on how to respond to attempts to remove materials or books from curriculum?
Nancy said, just give it to the board. Hi, superintendent. No, I think that it's always good. We are always interested to hear from our community, right? And to hear what the objections might be for a particular text. I think that our textbooks and our supplemental materials go through a rigorous process by which they are vetted by the professionals, the boots on the ground, right? And they are with the opinion of like our librarians, for example, and a whole group of other people. As Julie mentioned, we have an elementary curriculum council and a secondary curriculum council. I think that we're always interested in having that conversation if somebody objects to a particular book or supplemental material, and having a conversation of why it was chosen and walking them through that process, very much like some of the curriculum that you see, right? And we've spoken about today. Because we want to make sure that we're supporting all of our families and understanding what our process has been and why that particular textbook was chosen.
Okay, and the final question, I think a ringer gave this one to me to close it out. So given the interest and sometimes concerns of the community over certain topics such as ethnic studies, gender identity, etc., does the district plan to host more forums and discussions with the community to incorporate feedback or address concerns from both sides of the spectrum?
Phenomenal question. I think we're always, open to honest and thoughtful conversation. I think this year is an example of, we've had an example of that through the Ethnic Studies Feedback Committee. So Avery, engineer, and Mr. Wang, who teaches the Ethnic Studies for us at Live Oak, we've met on a quarterly basis with the parents whose children are currently taking ethnic studies to solicit their feedback. Actually, this Wednesday is our last meeting of the year. We crafted a presentation together that explains the skills that students are learning in that course. The curriculum will be covered. The teachers are very thoughtful in talking about what they've learned along the way this year, right? What they were going to do better. I was a high school teacher. I will tell you, first period's kind of shaky. Seventh period, I got this, right? If you're in high school, that's the way we're learning, and we're putting curriculum together and great lessons for students. And so we are very thoughtful about that conversation. We are going to be having a debrief when we finish the year about like, how do we solicit more input? For example, bringing additional Indigenous voices to the curriculum, other representation along the way. That's something we're going to be looking at in the month of June, because next year, ethnic studies is an elective course, right? And we want to iron out the details so that when we roll this out in 25-26 as that, requirement for graduation, we solidify what grade level, what standards, and we continue to work together with our wonderful teachers and then our community as well.
Thank you. That is the end of the questions. I would really like a round of applause. And I know that there are a lot of retired teachers in the room, and I would like to have all of the retired teachers or current teachers, please stand up so that we can acknowledge your hard work. So thank you again for your participation and attention tonight. And I'll remind you, as Suman also mentioned, that AAUW sponsors candidates forums before every general election. These will be on 3 successive Wednesday nights in September. One of them will be a school board candidates forum. So please, when you see there's a notification in the various media about that, please make note of when those are. They will all be in the evening at the city council chambers over there. And again, thank you again to everyone for coming, for all of you, and for all of you for giving an evening to this really important topic.
Wow.